Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Jai Gopi Janaballabha Girivardhari Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Paravajakacharyato, Tadasata Shri Śrīmad, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki, Grantaraj Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Ki, Sam Veda Bhakta Vrinda Ki, Gaur Premanande, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Shri, Shri Guru, and Shri Gauranga. Can I get some water? Because I ran dry yesterday in my little thing. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Anmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanvitam Tam Sujivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so we're on 293, is that correct?
Yes.
Bhagavatam 293. Yarhi Baba Mahimni Sve Yarhi Baba Mahimni Sve Parasmin Kalamaya Yoho Parasmin Kalamaya Yoho Rameta Gata Sammohas Rameta Gata Sammohas Tyaktvodaste Tadobhayam Tyaktvodaste Tadobhayam Yarhi Bhava Mahimni Sve Parasmin Kalamaya Yoho Rameta Gata Sammohas Tyaktvodaste Tadobhayam Yarhi Bhava Mahimni Sve Parasmin Kalamaya Yoho Rameta Gata Sammohas Tyakto, Tyaktvodaste Tatobhayam. yahi bhava mahimni sve parasmin kalamaya yoho rameta gata sammohas tyaktvo daste tato bhayam. Yahi bhava mahimni sve parasmin kalamaya yoho rameta gata sammohas tyaktvo daste tato bhayam. Yahi, at any time. Bhava, certainly. Mahimni, in the glory. Sve, of himself. Parasmin, in the supreme. Kala, time. Maya yoho, of the material energy. Rameta, enjoys. Gata sammoha, being freed from the misconception. Tyakva, giving up. Udaste, in fullness. Tada, then. Ubhayam, both the misconceptions of I and mine. As soon as the living entity becomes situated in his constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifest as the pure self. So I say, and you please repeat, as soon as the living entity becomes situated in his constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifested as the purest self. So here's Prabhupada's purport. The two misconceptions of life, namely I and mine, are verily manifest in two classes of men. In the lower state, the conception of mine is very prominent. And in the higher state, the misconception of I is prominent. In the animal state of life, the misconception of mine is perceivable even in the category of cats and dogs who fight with one another with the same misconception of mine. In the lower stage of human life, the same misconception is also prominent in the shape of it is my body, it is my house, it is my family, it is my caste, it is my nation, it is my country, and so on. And in the higher state of speculative knowledge, the same misconception of mine is transformed into I am, or it is all I am, etc. There are many classes of men comprehending the same misconception of I and mine in different colors. But the real significance of I can be realized only when one is situated in the consciousness of I am the eternal servitor of the Lord. This is pure consciousness, and the whole Vedic literature teach us this conception of life. The misconception of I am the Lord or I am the Supreme is more dangerous than the misconception of mine, although there are sometimes directions in the Vedic literatures to think oneself one with the Lord. That does not mean that one becomes identical with the Lord in every respect. Undoubtedly, there is oneness of the living entity with the Lord in many respects, but ultimately the living entity is subordinate to the Lord, and he is constitutionally meant for satisfying the senses of the Lord. The Lord therefore asks the conditioned soul to surrender unto him. Had the living entities not been subordinate to the Supreme Will, why would the living entity be asked to surrender? Had the living entity been equal in all respects, then why was he put under the influence of Maya? We have already discussed many times that material energy is controlled by the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita 9:10 confirms this controlling power of the Lord over the material nature. Can a living entity who claims to be as good as the Supreme Being control the material nature? The foolish I would reply that he will do so in the future. Even accepting that in the future one will be as good a controller of material nature as the Supreme Being, then why is one now under the control of material nature? The Bhagavad Gita says that one can be freed from the control of material nature by surrendering to the Supreme Lord. But if there is no surrender, then the living entity will never be able to control the material nature. So one must also give up this misconception of I by practicing the way of devotional service, or firmly being situated in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. A poor man without any enjoyment or occupation may undergo so many troubles in life, but if by chance the same man gets good service under the government, he at once becomes happy. There's no profit in denying the supremacy of the Lord, who is the controller of all energies. But one should be constitutionally situated in one's own glory, namely, to be situated in pure consciousness of being the eternal servitor of the Lord. In his conditioned life, the living entity is servant of the illusory Maya, and in his liberated state, he is the pure, unqualified servant of the Lord. To become untinged by the modes of material nature is the qualification for entering into the service of the Lord. As long as one is a servant of mental concoctions, one cannot be completely free from the diseases of I and mine. The Supreme Truth is uncontaminated by the illusory energy because he is the controller of that energy. The relative truths are apt to be engrossed in the illusory energy. The best purpose is served, however, when one is directly facing the Supreme Truth, as when one faces the sun. The sun overhead in the sky is full of light. But when the sun is not visible, when the sun is not in the visible sky, all is darkness. Similarly, when one is face to face with the Supreme Lord, he is freed from all illusions. And one who is not so is in darkness of the illusory Maya. The Bhagavad Gita 14:26 confirms this as follows. Mam chayovya vicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaya tan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So, the science of bhakti yoga, of worshiping the Lord, glorifying the Lord, hearing the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam from the right sources, and not from professional men, but from a person who is Bhagavatam in life, and being always in the association of pure devotees, should be adopted in earnestness. One should not be misled by the misconceptions of I and mine. The karmis are fond of the conception of mine, the jnanis are fond of the conception of I, and both of them are unqualified to be freed from the bondage of illusory energy. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam and primarily the Bhagavad Gita are both meant for delivering a person from the misconception of I and mine. And Srila Vyasadeva transcribed them for the deliverance of the fallen soul. The living entity has to be situated in the transcendental position where there is no more influence of time, nor of the material energy. In conditioned life, the living entity is subjected to the influence of time in the dream of past, present, and future. The mental speculator tries to conquer the influence of time by future speculations of becoming Vasudeva, or the Supreme Lord, himself, by means of culturing knowledge and conquering over ego. But the process is not perfect. The perfect process is to accept Lord Vasudeva as the Supreme in everything. And the best perfection in culturing knowledge is to surrender unto him, because he is the source of everything. Only in that conception can one get rid of the misconception of I and mine. Both Bhagavad Gita and Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam confirm it. Srila Vyasadeva has specifically contributed to the illusion living entity, the science of God, and the process of bhakti yoga in his great literature, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And the conditioned soul should fully take advantage of this great science. Wow, that's a huge purport. Yarhi vava mahimni sve parasmin kalamaya yoho rameta gata sammohas tyaktvodaste tato bhayam. As soon as the living entity becomes situated in his constitutional glory and begins to enjoy the transcendence beyond time and material energy, he at once gives up the two misconceptions of life, I and mine, and thus becomes fully manifest as the pure self. This chapter, we're in a new chapter here, answers according to the Lord's version. This is chapter 10 of second canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. And this is where we will hear the answers, or at least the beginning of the answers to the questions that Parikshit asked in the previous chapter, in chapter 8. So this first three verses, 1, 2, and 3, this is the sort of final of the three. These first three verses answer 2.8.7, which was in the previous chapter, where Parikshit asked about what is the relationship between the living entity and the material body. So this is really the $64 million question. This question is, if you can actually know the answer to it, you have crossed over material existence completely. I mean, we can know a theoretical answer for it, but to actually realize the answer to this question means that you have crossed over material existence. And it is very odd, very mysterious. We are convinced we are these bodies, even when we've been presented with Vedic knowledge and we read it and understand it, we're still convinced that we are these bodies. So how is this possible? The living entity is eternal. The living entity cannot be cut, burned, dried, withered by the wind. The living entity is by nature Sat, Chit, and Ananda, eternal, knowledgeable, and blissful. The living entity. But the body is none of those things. The body is temporary. The body is generally predisposed to various kinds of misery. The body is also full of various kinds of ignorance. Here Prabhupada kind of describes that there are two kinds of misconceptions, I and mine. And the karmis have the conception of mine, and the jnanis have the conception of I. The karmis are primarily focused on material enjoyment. So to enjoy materially, one has to have material possessions of various types. In other words, the purpose of life is to have the senses come in contact with favorable material objects. That's the whole purpose of a karmi's being. So that's where mind comes in. I want things that will become, therefore, mine, and I can take my senses and contact these pleasurable things. Then, for the jnani, there is more the idea of not being so much focused on this, material enjoyment of various sensory experiences, but instead to speculate and imagine all kinds of things. And of course, in this purport, Prabhupada goes through this whole explanation of how the living entity imagines that he is identical with the Supreme Lord. Why would the living entity think that? Well, Candraśekhara made this proposition quite prominent in his preaching. Although he only lived for 30 some odd years, he did an enormous amount of evangelization of this particular misconception. Of course, he was Lord Shiva, and he was acting under the direction of the Supreme Lord. So he was supposed to do that. And in this way, people who want to reject or ignore or avoid the Supreme Lord, they have one new avenue of doing that by thinking that they are the Supreme Lord. So this is Mayavad philosophy, that we can become God. And Prabhupada brings up some points about it, that a person can imagine that right now we're in Maya or we're in illusion, but when we become cleared from that illusion, we realize that we are God. Of course, immediately, as Prabhupada points out, the first question that springs to mind is, well, if we're God and we're in control of everything, how did we ever get behind the 8 ball? How did we ever get underneath the illusion? Why would it have ever happened? What's the mystery answer to that? So, of course, there's no logical answer to that because it's not true. But today, in this section of second canto, we are talking about illusion, various flavors of illusion. And illusion is very interesting topic, very mysterious topic. I wanted to point out that in Surrender Unto Me, actually not Surrender Unto Me, but Unveiling His Lotus Feet, Burijan, he describes that in this chapter, the first 3 verses, before I say that, what's a little bit mysterious about this chapter is you've got 2 sort of narratives placed on top of each other, sort of superimposed. You've got the narrative between Sukadeva Goswami and Parikshit. So Parikshit is asking Sukadeva Goswami questions, and Sukadeva Goswami is answering. At the same time, you have this narrative between Brahma and the Supreme Lord, which is going on too. So these two conversations are superimposed on each other, and we're sometimes kind of focusing on one and sometimes focusing on the other. Of course, what's really happening is that Sukadeva Goswami is using the event of the Supreme Lord speaking with Brahma in his answer to Sukadeva to Parikshit. So he's using that. And as Ram Roy mentioned the other day, in this chapter we will run across the Chatur Sloka, which are the nutshell verses of Bhagavatam. They're 2.9.33, 34, 35, and 36 in this chapter. So this is what this chapter is going to wind up as the main focal point. But from 1 to 3, these first 3 verses, this mysterious relationship between the soul and the body is discussed. This is the answer to the first question that Parikshit asked Sukadeva Goswami to speak about back in the previous chapter. Then from 4 to 18, we will hear about Brahma being shown the Vaikuntha worlds by the Supreme Lord. So first 3 verses are about the nature of the relationship between the living entity and his material body. Then from 4 to 18, Brahma will be shown the Vaikuntha worlds by the Supreme Lord. Then from 19 through 30, Brahma, or the Supreme Lord, will show his favor and his happiness at Brahma, and Brahma will ask the Supreme Lord questions. That's from 19 through 30. Then 31 through 37 is where the Supreme Lord answers Brahma's questions, and that's where the Chatur Sloka are, in 31 through 37. And then the last section, 38 through 46, the last part of this chapter, will be where I'm trying to remember what happens there in that last section. I think, if I remember correctly, Brahma is getting some more questions answered or something like that. I've forgotten what that last section is about. At any rate, this chapter is full of very key philosophical points. So that's what's amazing about this particular chapter. This particular chapter, if someone has at least a basic grasp on it, then you're quite a long ways into understanding fundamental Vedic knowledge, the fundamental predicament that we're in this material body, and how to get out of it. The identification of the living entity with the body is so strong, but at the same time we learn that this is an illusion. How could it be so strong if it wasn't for the Supreme Lord making it so very thick? Most people never even question the idea that they're the body. They just assume they are. And in our modern day, most people think that when the body is finished, so are they. That when the body will end, so will they. Only a few people believe that we go on beyond the body, and most of those think that we have one life and we go to heaven or hell, either one, for eternity. But few understand the transmigration from one lifetime to another until one finally stops playing this game, which is why we had the body in the first place. That's what we learned in verse 1 and 2, that we get a body because we wanted to be like the Supreme Lord. So we cannot be the Supreme Lord because we are always subordinate, because we are always tiny. The Supreme Lord is neither subordinate nor tiny. So in that way, he is completely different, in a completely different category from us. So we can never be that. However, because we want to be like that, the Supreme Lord creates this murky, strange world where we can imagine that we are that way. So in this material world, which Prabhupada describes as being like a dream, and the Bhagavatam also calls this material world something like a dream, that we dream at night for 15 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, however far we go into a dream, and then we wake up. But in the daytime, we dream a dream that lasts 80 or 100 years. So we dream for a few hours at night, but in the day we dream for 80 or 90 years. But they're both dreams. And even many people in the scientific sort of view of things think that this world might be virtual, and they're correct, it really is. But if we say that this world is virtual, then that assumes somewhere there must be a non-virtual world. So if something is virtual or artificial or superficial, then there must be somewhere where there is this non-superficial, non-artificial world. Where is that? What is that? Of course, that's the actual spiritual world. To go there, one has to be removed from illusion. And Prabhupada uses this analogy of dreaming, where a person imagines that they're being attacked by a tiger. I have this experience. I assume most people have the experience of having something bad happen in a dream, and you wake up and you suddenly relieved because you realize that it really didn't happen, And if you think about dreams, things happen fast in dreams, You move from one situation to another, and sometimes the connection between the situations is crazy, I'm standing on a tower, I'm about to fall, I'm very afraid. I look at the ground, suddenly I'm on the ground. And there's no relationship of how I got from the tower to the ground. And I'm no longer afraid because it just changed. And in the material world, everything has this long, entangling cause and effect where to go from position A to position B, you have to go through all these interim steps. But in dreams, it doesn't work like that. Actually, about 4 days ago, I had a dream where for the first time I noticed that sometimes there are smells in dreams. I had never noticed that, that sometimes there's odors in dreams. I remember dreaming walking into some kind of an area or a room and there was a musty smell in it, and I never recall ever having that happen before. Mostly dreams are visual and audio, but in this case, this one had some odor to it. Interesting. At any rate, the idea of a dream is that the dream is over, and when it's over, then you realize it was insubstantial. That everything about the dream is no longer of any importance because you are now completely 100% disconnected from the dream. When you wake up, you realize you didn't find $100,000. I don't know, sometimes I have dreams of finding money. I think other people might, or as Prabhupada says, dream of being king. You think, oh, I'm a nice king now, everybody's serving me. I've never had a dream of being a king, but I have had dreams of finding money. So you wake up and you think, oh, this wasn't real. But at the same time, you know, we have these dreams where you're being chased by a tiger and you wake up and you go, whew. And the minute you wake up, there's no question of what do I do about the tiger? There's no tiger. And we ask the question of what is the connection between the body and the self? And when did it take place? The answer, of course, is never. We never were the body. We are not the body now. And so how is it that we think we're the body? This is a mysterious question. And it's this miracle of the Supreme Lord allowing the illusory energy to put us into this hypnosis of a connection with something that we have no connection with. And it's a virtual game. We play it for a number of years, however many we get in a particular lifetime. And there are other players, and we can affect them and they can affect us. So it's a multiplayer game, if we're talking about modern, digital cybernetics, where people are playing these computer games. So it's a multiplayer game. Now, the night dream doesn't appear to be a multiplayer game. It's just kind of you and nothing else, you know. The people in it don't appear to have any connection with any other people anywhere else. But the day one is a multiplayer game, so we're involved with these different individuals. And, you know, sometimes when I first wake up, I have this feeling of there's this fleshy blob hanging off the bottom of my consciousness, you know, that it's this thing, you know, that my consciousness is up here, and there's this fleshy blob hanging off the bottom. And then I just pop right back into being the body, and I start washing it and brushing the teeth and washing clothes and all that kind of stuff. So the body is not us. And the material world is full of all kinds of illusions. And I always think that there are three particular words that are wrongly defined in our everyday world. And those three words are happiness, love, and freedom. That people have a completely mistaken notion of what these three things are. And if you understand what they actually are, it reroutes your entire reality. If you think about them the way most people think about them, you think the way most people think. And the other day I noticed as I was going up the stairs out there that, Pancharatna and his chant now sign says those three words too, you know, love, happiness, and freedom. But he adds knowledge. So we could add knowledge too if we wanted to. But of course he's using it in a different context. But freedom, people think, means that I can do whatever I want. But only the Supreme Lord has that freedom. We have the freedom to choose one of two options. We can be freed from restrictions of Vedic protocol, or we can be free from the modes of nature. But we can't do both of those things. We can do one or the other, you know. If we want to be freed from Vedic restrictions, then expect to be pummeled by the modes of nature, you know. If you want to be free from the modes of nature, then you better be very serious about trying to follow Vedic restrictions. So you can choose your poison, you know, one or the other, but you can't get rid of both, you know. So an intelligent person will choose Vedic restrictions because being under the thumb of material nature is not at all a happy situation. You don't want that. Now, as far as love goes, most people think that love is an emotional outpouring towards a targeted romantic partner, that's what love is, you know, that's what we will have, you know, some kind of emotional outpouring. But that's not at all what love is. Love is our original relationship with the Supreme Lord, which is based on our wanting to do for Him anything, which is a very different conception of love. And of course, now we've talked about love and freedom. Happiness. What is happiness? Most people think happiness is the senses meeting the sense objects. That's what happiness is. But what is happiness? Happiness is our existential condition. We are, by our very nature, happy, as long as we're not trying to enjoy the senses. As long as we're not trying to be free in the wrong way, then we will be happy. We don't have to do something special. We don't have to get something special. We don't have to be someone special. So that's the deal there, you know, that these three words are misunderstood by common people. And when they're understood properly, then the illusion fades. If we understand we're not I, me, or mine, we don't want to try to enjoy material energy. We want to rather try to serve the Supreme Lord. And of course, when we serve the Supreme Lord, we come out of, as Prabhupada puts it, the karmi concept, and we come out of the jnani concept, because the karmis just want to enjoy the material world, and the jnanis want to speculate about the material world and imagine that there may be the Supreme Lord. So once we give up both of those projects, then we start to see things the way they really are. We wake up from the dream. Prabhupada used the example of, you know, the child wants the moon. There's no way to give the moon to the child, so you give the child a mirror. And the child sees the moon in the mirror, and now he's got the moon in his hands. You know, so in a similar way, this is how the Supreme Lord deals with the living entities. They want something that they can't have, so the Supreme Lord arranges an arena or a environment where they appear to get it, but only if they don't look too close. So as long as you don't look too close to material nature, things appear to be doing what you want. But, you know, in the material world, nothing ever lasts for very long. Nothing is very deep. Nothing is very fulfilling. Everything is just kind of there, kind of not there. You have what you want, but there's some fly in the ointment somewhere. It's obvious to you that, you know, in a few days, a few hours or something, that this material happiness is going to fade. You're going to have to go on to something else, you know. You have to go back to work, or you have to do something else. Nothing ever lasts. And on top of it, if you start to pay attention, that there's all kinds of nasty things going on everywhere. So this is the world that we live in. So I'm going to stop there and leave some time for questions. Yes. Not a word.
In the verse, it's saying the living entity can enjoy transcendence beyond time and material energy. And we hear about time a lot. I'm just wondering, have you heard anything about time travel? Or is that possible? Because we know there's like gurus, someone that's self-realized is they know the past, the present, and the future. They somehow can know that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of Back to the Future, these like sci-fi movies.
Right, right.
I don't know. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, for sure you can travel into the future. There's no doubt about that. There's even stories like that, where, for instance, in the story of Lord Jagannath, the king, he goes to ask Brahma to come open the temple. And, so he's gone to talk to Brahma, but Brahma's busy at the moment that, King Indradyumna gets there. And so Brahma says, all right, I'll come for the temple opening, but, you should realize that time passes differently here than it does in the material plane. Everybody you knew is dead. And they've been dead for a long time. People don't even remember who you are. So when he goes back, so this is time travel into the future. So there's a different time scale. I've never heard of time travel in the past. It's not discussed in the Vedas anywhere that I've ever come in contact with. But time is not a thing. Time is a person, the Supreme Lord. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, time I am, destroyer of the worlds. So this is something that I think is most difficult for our Western scientifically oriented people to grasp, is that everything is plastic, including time, including relationships, including, whatever you want to think of in the material world, that anything can change or morph, however the Supreme Lord wants to change or morph it, So ultimately, everything boils down to him, as Prabhupada quotes this verse, Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sacharachara, that, this material nature is working under my direction, So it's producing the living entities, it's corralling the living entities, it's rewarding them sometimes with a few peanuts of material happiness, and in the next moment, hitting them on the head with a shoe. So it's doing all these things. And it sometimes works in one way, it sometimes works in another. But it's like a arena, like a virtual reality, like a holodeck or something like that, if you want to use a Star Trek analogy. It's like where everything can be there, and then the next minute it's all gone because nothing's actually really there. So to wake up from that, we perform devotional service. And this is kind of Krishna consciousness 101, the basic thing. We're not this body. But if we're not this body, why do we think we are? Why do we feel like we are? And the answer, of course, is that we're acting like a karmi or a jnani, and therefore we're identifying with the body. When we stop acting like a karmi or a jnani, then we also disidentify with the body. Any other questions? Yes?
Should we notice, I had a double question about one subject. Should devotees analyze their dreams? And if yes, so where is the, let's say, borderline between common sense and fanatic platform?
Uh-huh.
Because sometimes the people who practice spiritual, but yet so they have spiritual views, like
People practice what? Spiritual life, right?
yeah, they have spiritual dreams.
That's true.
Sometimes even Prabhupada, he's
Mm-hmm.
he's spiritual master before he accepted sannyasa,
Right. He had a dream of Krishna coming to him when he was on the Jaladuta coming over and all this kind. So what's up with dreams? Okay. Right. There's a simple answer to that. And that comes about when we read the story of Hridoy Chaitanya and, his disciple, who was called Dukhi Krishna Das, then Sukhi Krishna Das, and finally Shamananda. So it's described that when dreams do not contradict Vedic truths, then they can be accepted as actual spiritual dreams. Otherwise, they're usually Maya. 99% of the time, or maybe 99.999% of the time, they're some flavor of Maya. But occasionally, we have dreams where, Krishna gives us a look at something, And so therefore, if the dream doesn't contradict the philosophical points in the Vedas, then we can accept the dream as a special dream that is coming from the spiritual world. That was you had two questions or just that one? Okay. All right. Any other final questions here? So, with tomorrow's verse, we're going to move into this further conversation, as we say, two-leveled conversation between Brahma and Krishna. And Krishna will show Brahma the Vaikuntha world. And when Brahma sees Krishna, Krishna shakes his hand, which is interesting. So that's a gesture that's not a recent gesture. It was done at the beginning of time. So people shaking each other's hands is something that goes way, way back. All right, so thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. All glories to Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Oh, there we go.